There, so I've shared my screen. Hopefully you all can see that. And just to give you a bit of background, so for those who are new to Hummingbot, so Hummingbot, it's an open source software that's we've created to have basically institutional grade trading capabilities for the crypto market. It integrates with centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges, and it allows anyone to run these strategies. So we also tried to make it easy enough to use, so for even novice users, like anyone who's maybe a novice trader or not so technical, to kind of get it up and running and set up. Obviously, it is somewhat complicated, so it does require reading through the documentation as well, and to help get set up. And we also have a full-time 24/7 support channel on our Discord. So we have a team there to help anyone if they have any issues in setting it up. And then later in this presentation, or in this tutorial as well, I will be covering liquidity mining. So that's something that our platform we started in March, which is going pretty well. And what that is, it's basically, just to give you a high level now, it's a way for users of Hummingbot to earn rewards for using Hummingbot. And the rewards, where they're coming from is we have a number of issuers. So actually just go to the screen right here. So we have programs we're running at the moment for 3 issuers right now, for Zilliqa, iExec, and Zcoin, where the issuers are providing rewards for anyone who makes markets in their assets, in their token pairs, which you can see here. So I'll go over that as well. So we could just jump right in. So I guess the Hummingbot, as I mentioned, it's an open source software client. It's intended to run on your own computer. So either you can run it locally on your machine. For more advanced users, I think the ideal setup for it is to run on the cloud. Obviously, it's for our algorithmic trading bot. You'd want it to be running pretty much all the time. You'd also want it to have a stable internet connection. So that's why running it in the cloud is typically easier. Other things as well, it's a bit easier to upgrade. And if you want to run multiple bots, I'll kind of mention that a bit as well. So things like running, so right now Hummingbot is able to trade a single pair. So if you do want to run multiple instances, trade on multiple pairs, you would have to run multiple instances of it. Again, that's probably easier using things like Docker. And so we do have in our docs some guides on how to do that. So a few useful pages here that I have opened. So obviously this is our homepage. So this is Hummingbot. Although I mentioned it's probably easier to run it on the cloud. I'll show you an installation now. The easy way to get started, you could just simply download it and run it locally on your machine. And then some other pages before we jump in right there, our docs site. So basically docs.hummingbot.io. So what this has here is a lot of our start guides, overviews on the different strategies, as well as things like FAQs. And this also has like terms of like update the current like liquidity mining campaigns. So there's a lot of information here that you can go through. And then also just to get started or a bit more background, if we go here to Binance. And so one of the examples I'm going to show today to configure, we'll just choose Zcoin versus Bitcoin. So that's one of the pairs that's eligible for liquidity mining. So I just pull up that screen. So after I go here to Zcoin, there we are. So this is the example I'll be using to configure the bot. And again, also just to give a quick intro as well. One of the common strategies that Hummingbot's used for right now, and the one that's basically applies for the miners app as well, is we call it pure market making. So what market making is, just to give a quick overview, as you can see here, if you've traded crypto before, which I'm assuming probably all you probably have, you'll be familiar with this kind of screen, which is called the order book. So here you see 2 sides of the order book, the bid side. So green, those are folks who've placed orders to buy this asset and at a given price. So you can see here, these are the prices they've indicated. This is the amount that they've indicated, and this is not necessarily one market maker. This is probably multiple. So this is just an aggregation of all the orders in the market at that price. And then on the other side, these are ask orders, the sell orders. So these are prices that people have indicated they're willing to sell Zcoin, and the given sizes that they're willing to do that with. So this table, you can see, translates into order book depth, these kind of charts here. And so one of the basic strategies that Hummingbot has, and it has 3 strategies. This is the most basic one and the most used one. So basically, we call it pure market making, because what it does is it creates both bid and ask orders. So typically, how market makers work, they will try to capture a bid-ask spread. So they'll tend to try to create an order lower than the mid price. So the mid price is kind of the reference point. It's basically the average or the best bid and the best ask order. And so that's kind of the reference price that the strategy uses. Although there are, you can customize it to use other prices other than the order book, but in the simplest basic version, it will just look at the current order book, calculate the mid price, and then you set the spread. So how wide, so how much lower than the mid spread you want to create your bid price, and how much higher you want to create your ask price. So the typical kind of, and maybe addressing one of the questions that Zahar had at the beginning. So in our docs, we kind of have an overview of the different strategies. Here, like pure market making. And we also have, it might be in FAQs. So here we have kind of the risk, some discussion of the risks. So what we show here is typically for market making. So that's where you're just creating bid and asks orders for one asset. Typically, how a market maker, how they make money is you try to capture the differential. So basically, by setting your spread, your bid price lower and your ask price higher, over time, what you're trying to do is capture that differential. So you hope that if in a relatively stable market, if your bid gets filled, if the prices bounce around, you hope at some point your ask will get filled, and then you're able to capture the difference. So the general like kind of profit and risk profile for a market maker is like in relatively stable markets. So that's where prices, like you can see these 2 ranges here, where prices are relatively range bound, so not moving one way or the other too fast. Those are areas where market makers generally tend to generate profit. So you tend to accumulate small like bid-ask spreads over time, and then the risk for market makers is if the market moves away suddenly or quickly, and that's where a market maker, you can see here, could potentially suffer losses if like, for example, here if they have bid orders here, but that gets filled. So someone basically fills your bid order, so the market maker is acquiring that asset or that inventory, but the prices keeps going down. Another like risk for market maker is this kind of graph where it's trending. So again, even say at the beginning point, if you set your bid spreads lower than the price, if your bid order gets filled and you acquire the asset, the risk is, it's called inventory risk. It's owning inventory, but the value of it goes down over time. So those are the main risks for the market maker. Is inventory risk, is holding inventory when the value of what you're holding goes down. So you can see here, that's a risk. We do have kind of ways to mitigate that in the strategies. So I could briefly touch that here, but we also have an advanced tutorial that we have. If we don't have time here, the advanced tutorial, we discuss some of the more advanced features. So that's advanced market making, where we have some things that can help mitigate some losses in the event that you incur, like in this kind of scenario. So that's kind of a bit of an overview. We'll actually see it in action when we run the demo So we can just get started on that right here. So here, as I mentioned earlier, the easiest way to get started is just to download and run locally on your computer. So I'll just do that here, hit download. Also, just a note, so we haven't, so you can see here, I'm actually running the Mac version. We haven't, so it's, while it's downloading, we haven't registered it with the Mac App Store. So what you will see is you get a security warning. So I'll just like open up the settings. So you may have to override the security to make sure that you can actually run the program. So 1 sec. Okay, here's the setting. Also, I think, unfortunately, I think it's like my internet connection is a bit slow. So while we're waiting for that, I'll show you one other thing. So in order to run Hummingbot, so you will need to have assets on what you're trading. So you can see here, my account on Binance does have some base, and so base, which is Zcoin in this case, and as well as quote token, sorry, which is bit. So base, which is Zcoin. So here I have 32 Zcoin, and then quote tokens, I have like 0.038 Bitcoin. So I have some of both on the on balance already on Binance. So by having both, that allows me to place both bid and ask orders. So for example, here, if because when you're creating orders, you actually need to have inventory. So in order for me to place a bid order, I need to have some amount of Bitcoin. And then in order for me to place a sell order, I need to have some amount of Zcoin. So you can see I have some of that here already. Also, since Hummingbot is, it automates your trading, so you need to have authority to execute trades for you. So how you would set that up here is you'd have to set up API keys for that. So you just go to API management. So here you can say, you can just create one. So I already have some created already. So here to create an API key, it's pretty simple. You just create a label, hit create. One thing to note, so there's actually two parts, the API key. There's the API key itself, which is kind of quote unquote public. And then there's a secret key. So those are both, you need both of those and keep note of those when you create the API key. While we're here, I'll also mention something. By default, the API keys created by Hummingbot are enabled for trading. So, so if you create an API key, that's pretty much by default, it's ready to go for use in Hummingbot. So you get your API key, you get your secret key, and that's what we'll enter once Hummingbot starts running. Then for the Miners app, so what that does is kind of a separate system. So Hummingbot runs locally. So when you're running Hummingbot, Hummingbot, our company, we don't know what you're doing. So it's you run it. It doesn't send us any information, so you're running it as you wish, and we don't know anything about that. So in order to participate in Hummingbot Miners, we do need access to some of your information. So then in that case, you would need to create read-only API key. So that allows us, if you wanted to participate in Hummingbot Miners, that allows us to get some of your data, which we would use to determine the rewards you'd be eligible for liquidity mining. So in that case, after you create your API, again, by default, it's enabled for trading. So in that case, you would just go, say here, you edit restrictions, you untick the enable for trading, and then you hit confirm or save. And that's how you would turn off that trading. In this case, I'll just hit cancel because we need that for trading. So this is kind of going pretty, okay, there it goes. Slow at the moment. So we'll just wait for that for a second. Actually, in the meantime, I'll just check the questions first to see if there's anything I can address now while we're waiting. Okay, so one question is how can Hummingbot compete with high frequency trading firms? So from Giuseppe. So that's great. So I would say right now, so Hummingbot, it's kind of there's different kinds of high frequency trading. So I think in the traditional financial markets. So if you guys have seen or read the book Flash Boys or seen the movie, that's where basically people use infrastructure as technological advantages to kind of front run orders or capture ARB in the markets. I would say Hummingbot is not that kind of doesn't have that kind of capabilities. I think I am aware that there are some firms who do that in the crypto space, but I would say it's probably right now Hummingbot, we've designed it to be more for quote unquote the long tail. So it allows basically anyone to market make for some of the smaller tokens or for issuers to kind of provide liquidity for their tokens. And when I say kind of long tail, it's like I mean like things that are not maybe the top 10. So things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, things like that. I would say like for high frequency trading, it's a pretty big investment to get that infrastructure set up and to set up those strategies. So one advantage in the crypto markets is you don't have many of those folks doing things like some of the smaller tokens. So I think that the best application for Hummingbot is maybe for some of the less liquid tokens. In that case, you're not necessarily competing with some of the high frequency trading firms. I think for the most part, I would expect that people who have created the infrastructure to do that are probably trading more like the Bitcoins, Ethereums, Ripples, those kind of things. So so to that end, Hummingbot allows you to go for markets where there's not too much saturation, where you're not competing with too many folks like that. And then so the other question from Mark is how does paper mode calculate market values? So paper mode should be using basically the values from the exchanges. So it basically does everything as the actual strategy would do, but it just doesn't actually execute the actual trades. So it should be using the values from the exchange. So using mid levels and also using that to determine your I guess bid ask prices. So list of supported exchanges will be increased in the future. Yes. So we actually just put out the other day a kind of our roadmap. So if you go to our GitHub, whoops. Okay, it's went to my other screen. So here it is. Here it is right now. So if you look in the docs under there should be a connectors section. Here it is. So you can see the ones that we have enabled for right now. So these are available. I think that you can look in our roadmap, kind of the next ones that are in the works. So we have some requests for connectors. And we are working on things like, let me see where it's listed. Actually, I don't see it on here, but we have things like, so the current ones that are in progress are in the works apart from the ones we have already. So we're currently working on Bitfinex and Gate.io. So we're basically, a lot of the exchanges we're adding on here are exchange partners. So folks that we think that exchanges that we've kind of engaged in partnerships, or ones where we have issuers who want to run liquidity mining campaigns. So those are things like KuCoin and Liquid, ones we've partnered and that we'll be looking to launch liquidity mining campaigns on. So to answer your question, I guess it's unfortunately it's not clear here, but typically you can see kind of the things we're working on our GitHub. So you can see under pull requests, we have like HitBTC connector that's in pull request, and we also have there should be a Bitfinex one. So those are kind of like in the near term, probably within the next few weeks, we will be releasing those connectors. So the other question is, for Jeff turned on real trading and didn't see any orders filled, maybe just 3 or 4. Tried spreads of 0.0075, 0.015, XDC, BTC. Is this expected? Yes, I guess it kind of depends on the market. So basically, some markets are pretty competitive. So you can see kind of in the, actually, let me see if I can see it here. So I'm trying to see, I guess going back here. So for the Zcoin BTC pair, there we are. You can kind of see here, so how tight bid-ask spreads are. So if I had to calculate that, so it's all relative. So obviously, if Zcoin Bitcoin is relatively liquid, so the spreads tend to be tighter. So so I guess 2 things that would kind of impact how your bot is behaving or whether or not its orders are being filled. One is if you're wide, if your spreads are wide relative to kind of the market, then that decreases the likelihood that your orders are filled. The other thing is if you set your order refresh to be a very small time, so only a few seconds, for example, what happens is it will keep updating the prices more often. And so you're always constantly changing the goalposts. So if you change those to be longer, then you increase your likelihood of orders getting filled. And then if you make your spreads tighter, then that also increases the likelihood of getting filled. So those are probably the 2 things that would impact how the behavior. So Anita asks, is there a way for the community to help add more features to Hummingbot? Yes, there is. And we definitely appreciate contributions from the community, and we do have some active folks. So I think even when I showed you on the pull requests, so like hit BTC. So this is from someone in our community. We have folks like another company who actually created a connector for Kyber. So it's here. So we do welcome code contributions. That being said, we don't accept all of them, and the kind of the criteria for us accepting them is we want to make sure that it's relevant and useful for the entire community. So on the whole, for Hummingbot. The other thing is our team is pretty small, so when we accept code or a connector into our code base, it's not just the development work that needs to be done. It's kind of there's an upfront. We'd have to review that. We'd also run some Q&A testing on it. And it's not only upfront, it's an ongoing basis. So like anything we accept into the code is kind of a commitment on our side as well to maintain and keep that running and monitor those kind of features. So that being said, what I showed you guys earlier, where we have the project roadmap. So this is one where you can see some like things like bugs are prioritized. Actually here, so on deck. So okay, this is what I was kind of looking for earlier. So you can see here on deck means these are things that are in the works or prioritized that that are kind of being in development. So if you do want to contribute, again, we welcome that. In order to make sure, like, increase your likelihood that you're working on something that would be helpful and that we would likely incorporate, you can check the roadmap here. If you have a suggestion, feel free to reach out to our team on Discord and suggest them there. If you think there's a feature you'd like, you could actually just post it here. I'll create a GitHub issue and ask for that feature. So new issue, you could ask for that here. But if you want to kind of discuss with the team, feel free to get on our Discord and chat and kind of see where we can slot that into our roadmap. Okay, so finally it's downloaded. Unfortunately, it seems like my connection here is a bit slow today. So let's kick off the installation. So here it's finally downloaded. So I'll hit open. And what I mentioned earlier is that you might get a warning on your security. So I'll just get this up and running in case that happens. Okay, there we go. So hit cancel. You can see here on my security, at least for Mac, I'd have to go security and privacy. You can see it's blocked it. I go and hit open anyways. So it should take a while. You see terminal windows opened. It's going to start running. Oh, okay, it actually popped up in my other screen. So there it is. You can see the splash screen. One thing you note is Hummingbot is a command line interface, so it's intended to run in terminal. One of the reasons for that is, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this call, is one of the main ways to run this is through cloud servers on the cloud. So here we just hit OK. We have some warnings. So obviously, I think you should read through all these. So market making is a risky kind of endeavor. So market makers, it's really hard to do. So what we've done is provided a tool to allow you to do market making, but it's not like a one size fits all and it covers everything. I think market making, it's to some degree, it's a bit of an art, more than an art than a science. So things like make sure when you're getting started, especially if you're not too familiar with market making, it's kind of monitor the markets, understand them, use safer settings first, and try to just be cautious when you first start. So even some folks in the chat mentioned they're using paper trading mode. That's a good way to get started as well. So run the bots, play around with the strategies before actually deploying crypto. That being said, I think the best way to actually try something out is to use actual trading in crypto. So when you do get comfortable that you want to try it, start off with make sure you start off with like a lower amount of capital at first, and then over time, as you get more comfortable, then you can increase the amounts that you're deploying. But just a generally good rule of thumb: just try to be safe first before getting in over your heads. Before make sure you understand the risk of what you're doing. Okay, so now I'm just, when it's running it for the first time, it's going to ask me to set a password. So I'm just going to set a quick password. Okay, so there it is. So now it's up and running. So you can see here, and let me maximize this. Hopefully you guys can see us. So the Hummingbot interface, there's 3 panels. So on the top left, this is kind of the output. So this shows like when you enter commands. So even running things like status or history commands, you can see those come up here on the results of any kind of data requests that you send to Hummingbot. On the bottom left, this is the inputs panel. So that's where we would enter the commands. And then on the right, that shows the kind of kind of like logs from the exchanges. So in order to get started, we'll say connect. You can see here that I don't have any API keys configured, so I'm actually not able to trade on any exchanges. So in order to connect, I would just say connect Binance. So if we go back here, it will ask for my API keys. So here, I had that here. So the trade, make sure you're using the trade enabled API key. So I'll just copy the API key. Just paste that. And secrets, I have it on another window. Okay, so now I'm connected to Binance. So I can connect again just to check. You can see that yeah, I added my keys and they're confirmed so that it's working. Then to get started, we'll hit create. So create is basically is the way to initiate creating a new strategy. If you had previously configured one, then you would use import to load up one you've already created in the past. Yeah, let me try to make this bigger. Okay, hopefully you guys can see this. So If you hit in Hummingbot, if you hit tab, you can see it will have an autofill. So it will show you what the available inputs are for each prompt. So in this case, I'll use pure market making strategy. So the other strategies it has, and just to quickly cover those while we're on the screen, arbitrage. So that's a strategy where you'll trade between two exchanges. So you would set up API keys and set up inventory on two exchanges. Let's say Binance and say like let's say a DEX, so something like Radar Relay. So what it does is it will monitor the markets and you'll specify kind of thresholds. So if ever there's a dislocation, so if ever there's a point in time where you can buy low or sell high on one exchange, it will do that. So it uses what's called taker strategies. So in that case, it's not creating orders. It's just monitoring the markets. And so whenever there's an opportunity, it will actually just trade. So as a taker, it will fill whatever orders are available. So that's kind of a strategy that's intended to kind of like capture any pricing discrepancies. That being said, arbitrage opportunities, they don't come that often. So it's kind of one where you're kind of more monitoring, wait and see, and when it's opportunistic. But that's one that typically doesn't result in that many trades, just because generally the markets tend to be most of the time pretty efficient. The other strategy here is cross-exchange market making. So what that is, it's also called liquidity mirroring. That's where you basically hedge on one exchange and create orders on another exchange. So it's similar to arbitrage. So where it's using two exchanges. But in this case, let's say you would be a market maker, so you'd be making markets on, let's say, back to my previous example, Radar Relay. So Radar Relay, let's say, if it's less liquid than Binance, you'd create bid and ask orders on Radar Relay because the spreads there might be wider than, say, on Binance. And if those orders were filled, you would basically take or hedge them, offset those trades on Binance on the more liquid exchange. So what that allows you to do is basically to capture price differentials. So say if Radar Relay's markets are really wide, because you can hedge, you can buy or sell those assets on Binance. You can basically create orders on Radar Relay at a bit of a spread where you can buy them. So that's that helps kind of bring liquidity from Binance to that exchange. But in this example, we're just going to go with pure market making. That's where we create buy and sells for one asset on a single exchange. So here, if I hit tab, you can see the exchanges that are available. As I mentioned earlier, as we configured, we'll be setting this up on Binance. And here, I will enter which tokens I want to trade. So we're going to use Zcoin BTC as an example. And then here it's going to ask me how far from the mid price do I want to place my first bid order. So this is the bid spread. So here we just use 1%. And so 1% for Zcoin is actually a lot. So because Zcoin market is relatively tight. So I'll just go back to that screen. And typically, so the bid-ask spread is that's kind of one you'd have to, it's dependent on the market. It also affects your how much risk you're willing to take. So obviously the tighter your spreads are, the more likely those trades are to be filled. And also you kind of, so in Zcoin, which is relatively tighter than say some of the other markets, the spreads will be tighter for the market. So that will affect kind of what your bot does because you're kind of all relative to what the market's doing. So in this case, for this demonstration, I'll just use 1%, but we can see later when we launch that, it will be pretty wide compared to where the rest of the market is, but we'll just use that for now. Similar in this one, it's asking me what's my ask spread. So how far away from the mid do I place my sell order? So I'll just use 1% there as well. And how often do I want to cancel and replace bid and ask? So this is how often I want to refresh. This one, I kind of mentioned this earlier, like, again, you want to maybe play around with the settings here a bit. Typically, A lot of our users use anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds. There are other ways you can get it to be. You can also try some smaller as well, but for this example, we'll just use, let's say, like 45 seconds. So here it's going to ask me what size orders do I want to use. Here you can see that Hummingbot tells me that there's a minimum of 2.4439. So what that corresponds with is, so Binance has a minimum order size that general for all pairs. So it's usually around 10 US dollars. So what this is this is the amount of Zcoin that's equivalent to roughly $10. So if I were to place orders that were less than this amount, Binance would actually refuse them. So they would be rejected. So here we want to make sure I'm above that. And because the prices move around, I wouldn't want to use exactly 2.4439 because there is a pretty good likelihood prices tend to bounce around. And what's 2.44939 if that's equivalent to $10 now? Maybe a minute or 5 minutes from now, it may not be worth $10. So here I'll just probably give it a bit of cushion, say like 3. And then here it's going to ask me, we have a feature called inventory skew. So here it says on Binance, this is my current balance of Zcoin and Bitcoin. So by market value, it's saying my mix of Zcoin to Bitcoin is roughly 28% versus 72%. So what Hummingbot can do is it kind of can adjust your orders to kind of try and keep you maintain this ratio or any ratio you specify. So in this case, I'll say no. And instead, I will put, let's say 50. So what 50 is typically you kind of want to make, have both base and asset. So that allows you to place both buy and sell orders and try to maximize your likelihood of creating, of capturing the bid-ask spread. If you kind of fall below, or if you only had like one, if basically, let's say if I sold all my Zcoin and I only had Bitcoin, in that case, I'm only able to create buy orders. So I'm not able to create sell orders. So then that prevents me from being to capture or try to capture that bid-ask spread. So typically, this is a good setting to set. It also kind of helps. So how this works is, in this example, like you see, since my Zcoin is less than 50%, it would kind of adjust my orders. So even though I specified 3, a size of 3, in this case, because my Zcoin balance is lower than my Bitcoin, or it's less than 50%, Hummingbot will actually adjust my orders so that it will increase my bid size, make it more than my sell size. And until by doing that, it tries to help me try to get back to or maintain 50%. One other point on the inventory skew is what we call it. So that also kind of helps prevent like big swings in your orders. So one of the risks, which I mentioned earlier as well, is kind of like is inventory risk. So if the market moves one way or the other really quickly, if you don't have kind of inventory management, what happens is you might be switching from, let's say, 100% Zcoin and then instantly 100% Bitcoin. So switching back and forth. So in that case, like you're potentially exposed to adverse market movements. So by kind of maintaining a mix and kind of a way to kind of trying to get back to your kind of 50%, that kind of helps mitigate or try to minimize the likelihood of being swung around too much. So here, I'll save the config file. So it's pretty much ready to go. So if you see actually here, just to show it maybe side by side. So this account has another bot right now. So running on RLC ETH. So this is another testing strategy on this account. But you can see here, we don't have any Zcoin Bitcoin orders. So here, before we get started, one good thing to do is if you hit the command config, you can kind of review kind of the settings that you've created. So you can see here, we set up market making on Binance for Zcoin Bitcoin, 1% bid-ask spreads, 45-second order refresh time for 3 Zcoin orders. And then the other things are related to advanced features, so we don't have to look at that for now. Actually, one other thing that's helpful is we have something called kill switch. So this is typically, this is another good safety feature, so we would generally recommend enabling it. So I'll show you how to do that right now. So if you do want to change any of the settings in Hummingbot, I would just hit config and then put in that parameter. So in this case, I will set kill switch to on, and then related to the kill switch, there's also the switch rate. So let's say -5%. So just a quick explanation of what this is this is kind of a safety feature where if once I start running the bot, if at any point in time, the bot for whatever reason, let's say if it loses or incurs some trading losses, if it hits this threshold, then it would just disable the bot. So in this case, I've set it to 5%. So if the bot loses 5% when it's running, it will just turn off. So that's typically a good safety feature to have enabled. So if I split the screens here again, now we can actually run start. So you can see it's connecting to Binance, and there it's created orders for Binance. Here you can see it's created the buy order, and then it hasn't created the sell order because so here, well, first of all, you can see it's created a buy order for 6. And if I go back to Hummingbot, if I hit status, you can see here that because of what I showed you earlier, the inventory management, inventory skew function, because I'm below the 50%, it's adjusted my order size for the buy side, and it will basically wait and based on how far away you are, it will actually make these adjustments. In this case, it's doubled my size, so that's why there's a buy order. And then there's also inventory range band. So this is another setting you can set. Again, if you want to read more about this, you can read in docs. We also cover this in our advanced tutorial. But using just the default settings, you can see here the range that's allowable is 45% to 55%. What that means is because I'm outside of the band, because I'm currently at 28%, rather than creating a bid and ask order, it's only created a bid order. So once I do kind of fall within that band, it will continue to create both buy and sells. It will still adjust the pricing, the sizing, but in this case, because I'm so far away from the 50%, since I've fallen out of that range, it's not creating an ask order just because it's trying to catch up and try to get back to within that range sooner. And then if we go back to the Binance screen, you can see here that there's order. As I mentioned earlier, 1% for this market is relatively wide. So you can see on this list, it's not even showing on the table. So if I hit maybe more. Yeah, it's not even on the chart. So if I go maybe depth a bit more. Anyways, like so typically what you see is like when your orders placed, it will show up on this kind of this table. There will be a kind of a mark showing it's there. So that's kind of basically Hummingbot in a nutshell. So you can see it's pretty straightforward to get up and running. It's just a few configs that you have to input, and then it's pretty much up and running. So it will start monitoring the markets, updating orders over time, and then when any trading happens, you track them here. So so 2 commands that are pretty helpful when you're monitoring the bot. One is the status command. So that's one I already showed you. So you can see the current status, current orders being placed, and current inventory levels. And then the other useful command is history. So you can see here, since we just started the bot, there have been no past trades, but if it has been running over time, they would start showing up here. This also shows calculates your performance, so kind of the return that's generated from your trades. So you can see that here on history. And then just to tie that into a quick overview of liquidity mining. So that's pretty much it for the Hummingbot client. If you have any more questions, we don't have too much time yet, so we have until another 12 minutes or so. So I'll just quickly jump into Hummingbot Miners. In the meantime, if you do have any other questions, feel free. I also put my email here, so you can see I'm recording this session. So if anyone wants to replay it, send me an email and I can send you a link to the recording. But if you have any questions on Hummingbot, feel free to go to our Discord and chat with some of our team, our support folks, as well as our community there. So just jumping over to Hummingbot Miners. So I gave a quick overview of this earlier. So what Hummingbot Miners is, it's a way for folks running Hummingbot or anyone market making. So you can even actually, we've made it open so you can even use your own bot, or any bot if you do have one. So what this is these issuers are offering rewards to folks who provide liquidity for their tokens. So providing liquidity means so creating orders and adding to orders and creating order book depth for the tokens. So how this works here and just how you get set up is in this case, so if I first go to this site, I would connect my wallet. So here, you can see here, it's we're using MetaMask, although there are other wallets available in this demonstration. I'll just show MetaMask because that's the most widely generally used one in the market. So for MetaMask and why we need an Ethereum wallet address, this is kind of used for two purposes. One is this is the address that we use to register or identify like unique users. So you can see here, there was no KYC to get signed up. In order for me to kind of create my profile or my register myself as a user for miners, I have to like basically sign this and authenticate that this is my address and that's what I'm using to identify myself. The other purpose for this wallet is we're paying out rewards in USDC tokens. So this is the address that we use to pay the rewards to. So to get started, next step, hit settings. In this case, I'm already enabled for Binance, but if you weren't, you just click on, this would say disabled, you'd click there, and then you would just enter your API keys. Again, as I showed you earlier, it's we recommend that you use your read-only API keys. So that allows us to track your data. And so once you've done that, and once the bot's running, if you're creating orders for, let's say, Zcoin, Bitcoin, or some other pairs, you can see here that if you're in activity, you can see the rewards that you're starting to generate. But actually, just before that, just to go back to the screen, just to give a bit of an overview, what we have here is just to explain what's going on here. And kind of how liquidity mining works. So right now we have about 94 bots. Current liquidity, so what this means is this is the amount of orders that are currently being created in the market, in Binance, across all of these trading pairs. And then we have a figure here, current liquidity per day, current yield per day. So what this is it shows so each day we have a certain amount of rewards. So you can see here, so the total of these, that's the amount of rewards available per day. And then we show that in terms of like, well, if there's that amount of reward available, and compare that to the amount of inventory that folks are using for liquidity mining, which is the 69,000 figure here. So this divided by that gets you to a rough yield per day. So we kind of use that as a measure of showing like how to kind of gauge how much rewards are being offered or earned for the amount of assets that's actually committed for this kind of purpose. And then you can see for each individual token pair, these can vary. So if we sort it by yields per day, you can see in this example, Zcoin, Bitcoin, the rewards are actually somewhat higher than some of the other pairs. However, you can see here the liquidity is the highest. So what that translates into is in terms of yields per day, you can see that this is a slightly lower yield per day versus, say, if you look at Zilka ETH, this looks pretty low right now, the amount of liquidity. So for this amount of rewards, the liquidity, there's only about 2,000 of inventory on that pair at the moment. So you can see that that yield is pretty high. So this is kind of a measure to say, like, okay, if I wanted to participate, if I don't have a specific preference for, say, Zcoin, Exec, or Zilka, I could just go in here and say, okay, well, this is the highest one, so this is the one I'll start participating in, because that has the most returns. And so how these rewards kind of work is if we go to the activity tab. So this kind of demonstrates how it works. So what we do is, like, we take a snapshot each minute of the activity from all miners, and then how a miner gets allocated their reward is based on where they fall in relative to everyone else who's participating. So if we click on one of these snapshots, you can see here there's about one snapshot. There is one snapshot every minute. If we click on here, you can see this bot was running for RLC ETH. I think you saw that earlier here, that it's making orders for RLC ETH. There is a bit of a lag as our data processes that kind of orders. So that's why you see here, the last one was from 10:20. Right now it's about 10:50. 10:54 here. So there's roughly about a half an hour of lag. So that's why the Zcoin Bitcoin is at 0, because that was when the bot was off. But however, the RLC bot was actually running. So if we click on this, now you can kind of see how it kind of stacks, or how I got to the amount of rewards that was indicated. So here you can see this is basically my orders versus the rest of the market, or this testing bot's orders versus the rest of the market. You can see I had both sides, so bid and ask. So how the reward pools work is they're actually divided. So whatever is available for RLC ETH is equally divided into bid and ask spreads, bid and ask reward pools. And then, so you can see here, this is how my sizes compare. So that's one factor that's taken into account when we kind of allocate rewards between users. The other one is kind of spreads. So you can see here, this bot's spreads are pretty tight, so like 0.5%. Whereas if you look on average, weighted average across all miners is around 1%. So what this means is, like, for my orders, I will earn relatively more rewards than the rest of the market. So because we're factoring size, so what this means is, because I have $58 worth of inventory on this bot for this pair, what this means is, on average, if the market placed $58 of orders, I would earn slightly more, just because my spreads are tighter than the rest of the market. And then you can see that here. So that's kind of how it shakes out. How you can see I've earned rewards on both sides. One other thing to note here, you can see the bid side, right as of this snapshot, was much more than the ask side. So you can actually see that translates into how that affected my rewards. Even though my amounts were roughly, I mean, it was also a bit higher on the bid side, but still much closer than, say, the overall market. You can see here that on my bid side, I'm earning less than half of what my ask side is earning, even though you can see here, my actually bid size is even slightly higher than my ask side. One of the reasons this is because there's more folks in the bid side, I'm sharing with more people. So you can see what that results in is my rewards on that side is slightly lower than the ask side. So that's just like a general overview of Hummingbot Miners. One thing that's good is, like, for folks new to Hummingbot, this actually adds another income stream. So what this is separate from your trading. So it's typically helpful if someone new to Hummingbot to participate, because this helps subsidize your quote unquote experiments. So if you want to run Hummingbot, if you sign up for Hummingbot Miners, you will earn an additional incentive or rewards that can help, subsidize your kind of experiments. So it's another way to generate some value while you're kind of running different strategies. And for a lot of our users on Hummingbot Miners, a lot of them do it because they're able to generate these rewards. So that helps subsidize, like if their strategies break even, or if the actual bot run the bot itself is break even or even possibly at a slight loss, these rewards can help subsidize that and help you overall improve your portfolio's performance. So hopefully that was that gives you a bit of an overview of how Hummingbot Miners works. You could also read up more about it on our docs, or you can just on this app, miners.hummingbot.io. So we're gonna wrap up in the next minute or so. So I'll just check. I think there were a few questions on the group chat. So I'll just try to get to as many as we can in the next minute. So the first one is, can yields per day be negative? The answer is no, because basically the yields per day, it's kind of it's a positive. So it's always rewards versus liquidity. So you can never have negative rewards or negative liquidity. It's always positive. That being said, I guess someone who's participating in liquidity mining, you still could result in overall loss. So that's something to be careful of. So what that means is, in this case, so this yield this is only the rewards. So what this doesn't capture is your trading P&L. So in this example, like for Zilliqa ETH, if I were earning 1.77 on rewards, based on let's say this is my inventory, like $2,000. If I earn this much, if my trading results in losses of more than 1.77%, so let's say if I lost 2% on this day, then I would still be overall, I would have a negative return. The benefit here though is like, if that were the case, if I lost 2% on the trading or running the bot itself, at least at least I kind of subsidized that loss by earning 1.77 like on the side, quote unquote, on the side. So that's I would say that participating in Hummingbot Miners doesn't necessarily mean you'll be profitable, although it does certainly help you to increase your chances of being profitable. And then I'll take this last question from Crypto Gecko. So is it not very likely that orders get filled when you use 1.5% bid asks and just every few seconds? Yes, I would say it also depends on the market. So I would just caveat that and say, like, if you're using the bot on a very wide illiquid market, which say spreads are very wide, let's say even wider than 1.5%, in that case, like your 1.5% could be the best bid ask, right? So if you're looking at a market like Zcoin, which I just showed you, in that case, yes, it's pretty unlikely that you would get filled at 1.5%. So I'm not sure where that falls in the graph, but basically, let's say if that falls on this portion of the graph, every order ahead of you basically needs to get filled before yours gets hit. So running something like 1.5% is and adjusting every few seconds, yeah, you're pretty reducing the likelihood of that order being filled.